rose from the depths of the sea in a fiery display of nature's power. In time, growing lush and verdant from seeds borne by wings of birds, wind, and sea. From the south, thousands of miles away, a culture rich in history and ritual came to flourish in this tropical lushness. Faces from around the globe came to work the rich land and develop this jeweled chain of islands into a rich tourist paradise. Bathed in sun, sand, and sea, this is Hawaii. Located some 2,000 miles southwest of California, this 132-island chain stretches some 1,500 miles across the Pacific Ocean. Only 7 of the 8 main islands are inhabited, and each has a character of its own. Niihau is the smallest and is the last stronghold of Hawaiian culture. Kauai, Hawaii's oldest island, is the beautiful and lush Garden Isle, where visitors can bask in the awesome grandeur of the Grand Canyon of the Pacific at Waimea, windsurf on the swelling surf of the North Coast, or relax on one of the island's renowned resort golf courses. Oahu, the capital and heartbeat of Hawaii, is the multicultural gathering place of the chain, offering sunbathing beneath Diamond Head on famous Waikiki Beach, or a tour through the Pearl Harbor Monument. Scuba or snorkel in the protected marine park at Hanauma Bay, or feel the surging power of 30-foot waves on the far side of the island. Molokai is the undiscovered Isle of Friendliness, where cowboys offer horseback rides along magnificent ridgelines, or hiking in the peaceful surroundings of a waterfall-fed pool. Maui, the magic and awesome Garden Isle, where you can swim in the inviting crystalline waters of the 7 pools near Hana, stroll the shops in historic Lahaina, or sail in the kaleidoscope color of a Pacific Sea sunset. And Hawaii, the big island, the namesake of the state, is alive with scenic variety. From the active volcanoes still adding new land, to the lovely and lush Hilo and Hamakua coastlines and tropical Kona Coast, home of Hawaii's world-class resorts, Hawaii is vast and wondrous. Whatever your pleasure, Hawaii offers the visitor an uncompromising feast of sun, beauty, history, people, and activity. Here's Hawaii. The story of the Hawaiian Islands began millions of years ago, when powerful volcanoes erupted from the Pacific Ocean floor, gushing forth great quantities of lava. These shield volcanoes eventually grew into the islands of the chain, a process that continues today on the island of Hawaii. Kilauea Crater on the Big Island is the home of Pele, the Hawaiian goddess of fire. During eruptions, her power is awesome and spectacular. The primeval forces that shape the Earth's surface are still at work in Hawaii. Eruptions of Hawaiian volcanoes are usually not dangerous, but the lava flows can destroy property. When Pele begins her march to the sea, little can stop her. Homes and buildings are burned during certain eruptions, and occasionally the lava will reach the sea in a dramatic shower of steam. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, created in 1916, is the best known and most popular of all the Big Island attractions. Mauna Loa took 2 million years to reach the surface of the ocean, and another million to reach its present height. So the mountains are relatively young in geological terms. Mauna Loa is 13,677 feet above sea level and second highest peak on the island, a little lower than Mauna Kea. While active, the volcanoes within the park erupt less explosively than Mount St. Helens, and spectators can safely travel inside the park. The park's combination of roads and trails allow the visitor the option of driving for several miles, then parking and exploring specific sites, such as walking up to the crater rim. Danger is slight, and the rewards are high. Exploring this land of raw craters, smoking sulfur pits, sculpted lava flows, and piles of pumice. Devastation Trail is an eerie landscape formed by cinders from the 1959 Kilauea eruption, which left dead ohia trees burned clean of their leaves, standing skeleton-like in a bed of black pumice. Where the pumice reached the sea, it created the famous black sands of Hawaii, where waves break white in sharp contrast to the beach. Far from being a land of lava, this king-sized island of over 4,000 square miles has sunny coastlines, deep forests, and beautiful waterfalls, such as Akaka and Rainbow Falls. Much of the pleasure of the islands is found in quiet moments, observing the natural beauty of this Pacific paradise. The native orchids growing in the forest are so abundant that the island of Hawaii is called the Orchid Island. The ancient Polynesians that settled in Hawaii brought the age-old tradition of lei-making that is now a big business. Hilo is considered the orchid capital of the world. The orchid growers on the island have created hybrids that bring new size and color to the orchid family. But the greatest horticultural effort has gone into a plant brought by the Polynesians, sugar cane. The Big Island grows more cane than any other island. The days of hand cutting are over, for now planting and harvesting is done with large equipment. Today's Hawaiian fields produce more per acre than any other area in the world. The rich lava soil, wet climate, and perfect weather make this an ideal cane-growing area. In recent years, sugar refineries have been closed and acreage cut back due to competition, but Hawaii is still a major producer of sugar. Above the cane-growing areas are the cool highlands. Covered in grass, these excellent grazing areas are home to one of the largest private ranches in the world, the Parker Ranch, with almost 250,000 acres. Hawaiian cowboys, called paniolos, trace their riding and roping skills to Latin American cowboys. The lee side of the island is relatively dry and sunny. The Kona Coast, a world-class resort area. Beautiful beaches, golf courses, tennis courts, scuba diving, and the famed deep-sea fishing. The promise of tuna, bonefish, and the Pacific blue marlin, which can weigh over 1,000 pounds, lures fishermen from around the world to this vacation playground. Today, Hawaii's black sand beaches are a refuge from the busy modern world, while in the past, parts of the coast were also a refuge to the Hawaiian people. Tradition established these cities of refuge, such as Puhu, Honua, o Honaunau, which is now a national park site. By tradition, if breakers of the ancient laws could reach the refuge before the king's warriors, they were safe if they stayed a certain period of time. The wooden god images are a reminder of Hawaii's rich historical legacy. At the historical park, rangers portray the rich life of the Hawaiian people. Such places of refuge are no longer needed by the Hawaiian people, but they cling to other important traditions. The dances of the people have impressed visitors since the arrival of the first Europeans. Hawaiian music means the hula, a dance which has evolved into an art form. Early missionary efforts resulted in the dance being banned for many years. However, King David Kalakaua, who loved music and dance, restored the hula to the people of the land. The Merry Monarch Hula Festival in Hilo is held in his honor. The 1987 Merry Monarch Festival attracted schools of hula from as far away as California. It's called the Olympics of Hula. In addition to the men's and women's teams, each school enters a young wahine in the individual competition for Miss Aloha Hula. The traditional hula kahiko is performed in ancient costume to the sound of the chant and traditional instruments. These chants were one means for passing on Hawaiian culture from one generation to another. Modern hula is known as the Ahuana hula because the dancers perform to songs played on modern instruments. Victorian costumes represent the fashion during the Hawaiian monarchy. Traditional Hawaiian music is enjoying strong and growing support in the islands. Hawaii by ground is beautiful, but Hawaii by air is spectacular. From sun-drenched coastlands hammered by the sea, to silver streams of water floating down cliffs, to the hard lava fields and craters of the world's tallest mountains, this is the Big Island. Maui, the second largest island, enjoys a quiet style of living. A gentle land with exotic charm. Its soft green shoreline rings what was once two separate islands. The volcanic bases of lofty Haleakala and towering Pu'ukohui have been eroded by millions of years of water action to form the serrated ridges, gullies, and ravines. And eventually, the erosion filled the land between the two volcanoes, forming the Valley Isle. The beautiful Iao Valley, with its 2,250-foot Iao Pinnacle, is only part of the scenic beauty of the land, filled with ferns, flowers, and water. The abundance of flowers on the island staggers the visitors with visual and scented beauty. Plumeria's delicious fragrance is easily definable, and the hibiscus has been selected as the state flower. The west coast of Maui is now lined with motels, and one of the classic planned resorts, Ka'anapali, where every water-oriented pleasure is available. While much of the island is covered in condominiums and hotels and has become an important tourist attraction, there are still secluded and quiet parts, such as the Hana Coast. For those who dare the long and winding but scenic road, there are a series of pools with small waterfalls that eventually cascade into the ocean. The 7 pools of Kapalua, sometimes called the 7 sacred pools, were in ancient times called ohio. There were certain taboos associated with their use, but today they're a favorite picnic and swimming spot. They are part of Haleakala National Park. Haleakala means House of the Sun, and ancient legends tell of the sun passing quickly over Maui until the demigod Maui persuaded it to stay a little longer. The first rays of the sun illuminate the world's largest crater, 21 miles in circumference. It so resembles the moon that NASA astronauts used it for training before the lunar landings. On the mountain is found the rare silver sword plant, found nowhere else in the world. A plant that had adapted to the tremendous daily extremes of alpine heat and cold was brought to the brink of extinction by collectors before the park was formed. Today, it's part of the natural heritage protected by Hawaiian parks. The great volcanoes of the Hawaiian Islands were a beacon to the Polynesian navigators who sailed the Pacific and discovered these islands around 500 AD. They thrived by adapting native plants to their needs and by using the streams and ocean for fishing. They imported coconuts, breadfruit, bananas, and taro from their homes across the sea, for these people had already made great journeys in their dugouts and were aware of their needs. In low, swampy ground, they cultivated fields of taro. From the starchy tuber, they pounded and shaped the gray, pasty mash called poi. This has been a staple for the Hawaiian people. About 500 years later, fleets from the Tahiti Islands brought an aristocracy whose well-formed culture became the basis of Hawaiian society. Life was simple, but governed by systematic laws known as kapu. These taboos regulated life and relationships, but not all was work and religion. for the Hawaiian people had a love of beauty, as shown in the making of leis, which have been refined into an art form by the people of the islands using a wide variety of local materials. The arrival by sea of James Cook, the English navigator who discovered the islands for Europe, brought great changes. Contact with the Western world increased, and one of the first to benefit from the new ideas was one of the high chiefs of the island of Hawaii, who became the most famous of the early Hawaiians, King Kamehameha the Great. He unified the islands by conquest and set up a monarchy that was to last for the next century. The next great change came when whalers killed their first whale in the Pacific in 1819, and a new industry developed. It was dominated by Americans from New England for the next 50 years. An important stopping point became the town of Lahaina, which was the capital of the monarchy for a time. All that remains of that historic period are the courthouse, cannon, jail, old fort, and schoolhouse. The ships would anchor in the sheltered waters offshore, and sailors would come ashore. The diseases and problems they brought would alter the paradise. Today, Lahaina has become a jet-set destination for many tourists. Following in the footsteps of the whalers came other New Englanders, the missionaries whose churches in simple New England style dot the islands. Before the arrival of the missionaries, the Hawaiian people had thrown out the old kapu system of religion, and they were receptive to the new religion. The energetic missionaries in 2 years composed a written Hawaiian language and began to print reading and spelling books. A great literacy movement began. Long into the night, they would spend hours translating the Bible into the Hawaiian language. They would have a lasting impact on the islanders. But the best known of the missionaries in Hawaii was not from New England, but from Belgium, Father Damien, who lived and worked on the island of Molokai. Long and slender, the island of Molokai was created by volcanic activity millions of years ago. And today, the beautiful beaches and lush valleys are largely untouched. Tourism has been slow to develop, although the island is only 26 miles from Oahu. The friendly island once had a reputation for being a very unhealthy and unfriendly place. In 1866, lepers, rich and poor, were sent by the monarchy to the isolated tip of Kalaupapa Peninsula. The first exiles lacked food and shelter until, in 1873, Father Damien chose to live in the leper colony to provide spiritual and physical aid. After 16 years, Damien died from the disease. Leprosy, or Hansen's disease, was conquered in the 1940s with cell phone drugs. Today, there are less than 100 patients living at Kalaupapa. They are free to go, but choose to remain in what's been their home for so long. The site is now a National Historic Monument and may eventually become a park. Visitors are welcome, although arrangements must be made in advance. On Molokai, there are secluded valleys where the Hawaiian people live a quiet life, growing their own vegetables and enjoying the special family ties that unite the Hawaiian people. This lifestyle is rapidly disappearing on most Hawaiian islands. For many islands, including Molokai, the pineapple has been an important part of the economy. But for one island, pineapple is king, Lanai. The Dole Pineapple Company owns most of the island, and pineapples are the major industry. Slow-growing pineapples require over 2 years to mature. The harvesting of pineapples is labor-intensive, as a different picking standard is used each day. After harvest, the pineapples are transported to the world's largest cannery in Honolulu. At the Dole Pineapple Cannery, the pineapples are washed, and in another labor-intensive operation, workers prepare the fruit for shipping around the world. Today, the cannery packs in 10 minutes what required a full year of production when Dole opened in 1907. The sticky, sweet smell of pineapple syrup often greets visitors as they travel from the airport to downtown Honolulu on Oahu. The gathering place, Oahu, is home to 80% of the Hawaiian people. It's the sun-drenched playground of the Pacific. Surf, sand, sun, and sails. The heart of the capital island is Honolulu, a modern city of tall buildings and busy streets where the bulk of the population lives and works. It's the political, economic, and artistic center of the islands. As the gateway city to the Hawaiian Islands, it caters to the needs of tourists. Shops specializing in Hawaiian and Polynesian goods abound, and a sampling of local products might include Hawaiian print textiles. Tourism is #1 in the island economy. Waikiki is one of the most exciting and entertaining places to stay in the world, especially for first-time visitors to Hawaii. Along Kalakaua Avenue, nightclubs, stage shows, and cabaret stages are filled with colorful entertainers. The soft sands of Waikiki Beach welcome the sun-seekers, and the shoreline is ringed by modern hotels offering excellent vacation comfort. Of all the great hotels, the best known is the Royal Hawaiian, built in 1927 for Matson Line visitors. It's been the playground for the rich and still clings to its nostalgic glory as the Pink Palace of the Pacific. Visitors quickly don their swimsuits and join the crowd on the beach for the constantly changing show of suntanned and burned bodies, all enjoying the wonderful view and often perfect weather. With the blowing of the conch shell, visitors are alerted to the Hawaiian luau. This ancient part of native ritual has traditionally been a celebration for the firstborn, for a new house, or for a gift of the gods. Today, authentic luau's are rare, but the tourist luau is a popular substitute. This is the Royal Hawaiian Feast. The roast pig, called a kalua pig, is cooked in a lava-lined barbecue pit. The hot imu stones are placed in the body, the feet are bound, and while covered with tea leaves, it'll simmer in its own juices for several hours. Then, along with a lavish spread of local foods, it'll be served to guests. The luau is one of the long-standing Hawaiian traditions enjoyed in Honolulu. The other is the hula dance. This is a very old form of artistic expression and has been entertaining visitors for a long time. For many tourists, exposure to Hawaiian traditions comes with a visit to the Kodak Hula Show, which has been entertaining Waikiki visitors since 1937. The bleachers are full as tourists watch, free of charge, a parade of dancers in authentic native garb. It's a loose and happy event that fills pictures with images of cheerful and energetic flower-decked dancers and grandmothers in bright muumuus playing plunky ukulele music. Surprisingly, it's not the 4th of July or New Year's that's the big parade in Hawaii, but June 11th, when everyone celebrates King Kamehameha Day. This festival of sight and sound commemorates the very special heritage of the Hawaiian people. There's a large gala parade down Kalakaua Avenue, complete with floats and elegant pau horseback riders wearing colors and flowers representing their home islands. On one of the floats, a young boy represents the young Kamehameha, whose gold statue in front of the Judiciary Building is draped with 40-foot leis to honor the lost kingdom of Hawaii. After a period of hereditary kings descending from Kamehameha, the kings were elected. In the last quarter of the 19th century, elected King David Kalakaua built the only royal palace on American soil. Iolani Palace was one monarch's preoccupation with emulating the royal courts of Europe. He was crowned in a quaint gazebo called the Coronation Bandstand, where he placed the crown on his own head. The throne room became the center of activity. Plush carpeting, gas chandeliers, and 2 grandiose thrones from a Boston furniture company completed the picture of royal elegance. The feather plumes that graced the ceiling proclaimed the king and queen were home. In 1893, an American-led coup toppled the monarchy, and the palace became the seat of government. The palace was fully restored to its Victorian elegance after the government offices were moved to the new state capitol directly behind Iolani Palace. The new building represents a regional style of architecture that's exciting in concept. The architect captured many elements of the islands in symbolic form. The cone-shaped legislative chambers resemble volcanoes, and the 80-foot columns are reminiscent of royal palm trees. The government occupied the buildings in 1969, and the firmly established tradition of hospitality and openness continues in its new home. The modern campus of the University of Hawaii sits on a beautifully landscaped 300 acres and is the center of higher education in Hawaii, with special emphasis on Asian and Pacific studies. It's considered the finest institution of its kind in the Pacific. Another important institution in Hawaii is the Bishop Museum, established in 1889. Within its gray stone walls is the greatest collection of Hawaiian cultural and natural history specimens in the world. The island of Oahu is rich in military history. Indeed, it's hard to think of Hawaii without thinking of Pearl Harbor and World War II. The attack on December 7, 1941, was to profoundly affect the course of world history and life on these islands. In the early dawn, Hawaiians were unaware that out over the Pacific, Japanese bombers were flying toward what Franklin Delano Roosevelt would call the Day of Infamy. The attack was devastating. And today, the battleship Arizona, which sank in 5 minutes with a loss of over 1,000 men, lies on the bottom of Pearl Harbor. This monument was built atop the rusted hulk. From the visitor center, Navy shuttle boats carry visitors to Hawaii's 3rd most popular tourist attraction. About 20% of the visitors are Japanese. But perhaps the most moving sight on Oahu is the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, better known as the Punch Bowl, which is the burial site of 28,000 American servicemen. Another 26,280 fighting men are listed in a Courts of the Missing monument. High above the streets of Honolulu is the extinct volcano, where long lines of plain white tablets sit in an attractively laid out green expanse. The most famous person buried here was not a soldier, but Ernie Pyle, the war correspondent who captured the hearts of Americans. The crater is the most popular tourist destination in Hawaii. Among those buried in the Punch Bowl are members of the 100th Infantry Battalion and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. These Japanese-American units fought with uncommon valor and bravery in Europe. At the end of World War II, these Hawaiians of Japanese descent had become distinguished as one of the most highly decorated American military units of the war. They fought and beat not only the enemy, but also the prejudice of the time. They demonstrate the unusual nature of Hawaiian society today, a land of tremendous cultural diversity, where all groups are minorities. The insatiable demand for laborers to work the plantations created the unique multiracial society, as waves of Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Koreans, and Filipinos were brought to the islands. As soon as they accumulated enough money, they left the plantations and opened businesses and entered other occupations. Their descendants are now part of the mainstream of Hawaiian life and active in business, politics, and the arts. Hawaii is unique, and the saying in Hawaii, East meets West, is a cliché, but appropriate. There are Catholics, Shintos, Protestants, and Buddhists. The Odo-in Temple, one of the many Buddhist temples, is a replica of the 900-year-old temple in Kyoto, Japan. It honors the first Japanese immigrants. The natural setting of the temple is stunning, as it's situated in the valley of the temple's Memorial Park. Tourists not only explore the cultural attractions, but also enjoy a host of other activities, including visiting Paradise Park. Amidst the lush vegetation of the Manoa Valley, exotic birds live in a vast aviary. One of the many commercial establishments to entertain the visitor, here the birds put on the show. Soft evening breezes. Beaches lined with palms. Honolulu at night. Much of the beauty of Oahu is found outside the congested central business district and crowded Waikiki, as a trip to the majestic Nu'uanu-Pali Cliffs reveals, a place where Kamehameha defeated his opponents on Oahu and drove many off the cliffs to their deaths. The view, complete with gusty winds, is breathtaking from the top. The island of Oahu is divided by a central plain covered in fields of pineapple that lie between the western Wa'anai Mountains and the eastern Ko'olau Mountains. On the windward side, or eastern side of the island, Kailua Bay, with its long, curving swimming beach, is ideal for windsurfing. With the steady onshore breeze, it tempts the beginner and challenges the expert. Top windsurfing competitions are held here. Windsurfers combine aerial displays and wave riding. 1,200-foot cliff creating updrafts, hang gliders soar across the face of Makapu'u with its lofty white lighthouse. It's been called Hang Glider's Heaven because of the excellent launching location and prevailing breezes. The hang gliders fly above Sea Life Park, where marine mammals put on the show. The land-based tanks are filled with species from the coral reefs. Over 700 species of fish are found in these waters. Many of the colorful butterfly, angel, and parrotfish are found throughout the Indo-Pacific region. For the more adventurous, nearby Hanauma Bay is an underwater park teeming with fish. Snorkeling and skin diving are excellent in the shallow, protected waters. This ancient volcanic crater is open to the sea. A popular swimming location, Elvis Presley's Blue Hawaii was filmed here. In contrast to the quiet blue of Hanauma Bay and the tranquility of the beach are the bone-crushing waves of Sandy Beach. Body surfing and boogie boarding are popular on the waves, which, although they break short and violently, appeal to the youthful surfers. At the Polynesian Cultural Center on the campus of Brigham Young University, young Mormons from around the Pacific stage carefully crafted shows which, with a touch of showmanship, offer glimpses into the diverse cultures of the region. Hawaii, Tahiti, Tonga, Fiji, and Samoa are represented. Visitors are encouraged to join in the demonstrations of native crafts, dances, and folklore that are held in the villages representing the various islands of the Pacific. The show includes the daily pageant of the long canoes down the main lagoon promenade. During the evening, an elaborate stage show tells the history of the region. Young Polynesians sharing some of the romance of music and song for which Hawaii is famous. It's along the North Shore that during the winter arrive the great waves that bring out the world's best surfers. But even in summer, the show is exciting. But come winter, beach-shaking waves attract a handful of the world's best surfers on their elephant boards. Over 30 feet high, they're the world's largest rideable waves. Oahu is an island of many moods, varied terrain, and lovely people. A kaleidoscope of sights and sounds. With almost constant winds and a fair, warm climate, the Hawaii waters are excellent cruising waters, and they attract sailors from all over the world. Open ocean activities aren't confined to sailboats, as cruise ships frequent Hawaiian waters, and a floating vacation is popular. This is a throwback to when Matson Line ships and ocean liners were the standard way to travel to Hawaii. Now they're a comfortable alternative to land-based travel. The luxury of never having to unpack the suitcase twice, and outstanding cuisine that's standard fare on today's cruise ships are all part of the package. An excursion on the American lines includes stops on most of the islands and leisurely daytime and nighttime activities, enlivened with a touch of seagoing adventure, a humpback whale in his winter home, or a Pacific sunset. The Garden Isle, Kauai, is slightly undiscovered compared to its sister islands. It includes one of the most rugged sections of coast on the islands, the Napali Coast, with jagged roadless valleys dropping to the sea. It's the oldest of the islands and the most eroded. Parts of this island hold to the old ways, and taro is still an important crop, with much grown in the small farms of Hanalei Valley. Kauai is quiet, but 500,000 visitors explore the island each year. And from Coco Sands torchlight ceremony to nighttime entertainment and food, the tourist has a home. The Menehune fish pond in ancient times provided food. Today, the area provides excitement for kayak paddling explorers who cruise through the dense undergrowth alongside the river. This lush growth, a result of the heavy rainfall, gives the island its name, the Garden Isle. The island lives up to its reputation, for the flora is magnificent. Over 90% of the plants found on the Hawaiian Islands are found nowhere else. These plants were carried on the winds and ocean currents, brought by people and birds to become part of the beauty of Hawaii. Charles Darwin lamented his inability to study the islands, for he knew of their scientific value. But people have brought change and new species, and today many native species are threatened by extinction. Only in certain areas, such as in the Alakai Swamp in the heart of the island, do the native species have a refuge. The Wailua River is the only navigable river in Hawaii. It runs through the dense rainforest filled with ferns. The river is fed by the high rainfall of the mountains, which can average 450 to 600 inches annually. The Fern Grotto on the Wailua River, where hanging ferns drape down the damp rock walls, is a popular wedding spot. In contrast to the lush vegetation of most of Kauai, Waimea Canyon is a 10-mile slash descending 3,657 feet at its deepest point. Called the Grand Canyon of the Pacific, it's a sprawling landscape of ever-changing colors. Each layer represents a different chapter in the geologic history of the island. A series of trails zigzag down the steep canyon walls. The geology of the islands is often complex, and the resulting scenery magnificent, as a helicopter exploration of the island reveals. Hawaii, the Pacific Paradise Islands of adventure, set in the blue backdrop of our largest ocean. The awesome forces of earth building, natural beauty and floral lushness, beaches lined with palms, thrilling water sports, rich Polynesian cultural history, deep canyons and snow-capped peaks, beautiful dancers with tropical rhythm, powerful volcanic eruptions, the cosmopolitan melting pot of the Pacific, the Aloha State, a land of adventure, which Mark Twain called the loveliest fleet of islands anchored in any ocean. This is Hawaii.